subscribe to my channel.
My aunt, who was a nurse before she retired, worked at a hospital in Taiyuan during the 1980s. There were no security cameras or access controls, making it easy for patients and families to come and go. My aunt worked in the reception area, and she said that this story happened in the emergency department. The emergency room was always brightly lit, with doctors, nurses, and patients' families rushing around. A very busy place. At that time, a new surgeon named Lin joined the hospital. He was very skilled and got along well with his colleagues, but there were some strange things about him that kept Chen, one of the nurses, on guard. Chen seemed like any other nurse, but she had a hidden side. After each surgery, Dr. Lin would carefully write notes in a private notebook that he kept with him at all times. One day, Chen caught a glimpse of a few pages, and to her surprise, she saw strange phrases like, "The lost soul is preserved." It made her very uneasy. Since then, Chen began to pay closer attention to Lin's actions. She noticed that during each surgery, he would whisper things she couldn't understand, and after the surgery, he would stay alone in the operating room for a while, as if performing some kind of mysterious ritual. But recently, all of Lin's patients had recovered well, and there hadn't been any unusual incidents. However, Lin wasn't the only one with secrets. Chen herself was far from an ordinary nurse. She was actually a high-ranking member of a cult called Truth, Goodness, Beauty. The name sounded positive, but it was an evil cult that used slogans like soul purification and eternal salvation to cover up its dark deeds. They believed that capturing souls was a way to purify the world, and only by sacrificing those fallen souls could they achieve so-called salvation. Chen, as a saint in the cult, was one of the key members. The teachings of the cult sounded mysterious. They claimed that by capturing souls, they could purify the world. To achieve eternal salvation, they had to keep sacrificing these fallen souls. To keep their operations running, the cult engaged in many illegal activities, manipulating followers to donate money, illegal fundraising, extortion, and underground deals. They even extended their influence into hospitals, taking control of key places to carry out these soul-capturing rituals. In reality, the real purpose of these rituals was to steal bodies. The people whose souls were captured had their bodies secretly transported out of the hospital and sold on the black market, used for illegal research, organ trade, or other unspeakable purposes. In the 1980s, the black market for bodies was thriving, and the cult made a lot of money through these transactions to support their activities. Chen's job was to use her position as a nurse to choose targets, those who were lonely, had no family, or were seriously ill. These people usually had few social connections, and their disappearance wouldn't attract much attention. When the time was right, Chen would act, offering their souls to the cult for so-called soul ascension. Everything had to be done quietly to avoid any unwanted suspicion. Chen believed she was serving the cult's greater cause, but Dr. Lin's arrival became an obstacle. Every time Lin performed surgery, it seemed like he was trying to reverse something. He wanted to prevent souls from being captured and stop the so-called surgical complications that led to patients mysteriously dying and their bodies being stolen. Lin was not just an ordinary doctor. He came to the hospital with a clear purpose: to destroy the cult. His sister was one of the cult's victims. Her sudden death almost broke Lin. He kept thinking about the whole situation, how his sister had been admitted to the hospital with a fever, then improved after treatment only to suddenly experience severe abdominal pain and require surgery, after which she was pronounced dead. Lin, who was only 17 at the time, realized that his sister's death was not due to ordinary surgical complications. After his sister's death, their mother cried for 2 years before dying of lung cancer, and their father remained withdrawn. Lin spent years trying to sue the hospital for medical malpractice, but to no avail. Later, an elderly janitor told him that it was likely the work of the cult. His own wife had died in a similar way. With hatred for the cult, Lin, who was already an excellent student, studied hard, got into medical school, and changed his name. Later, he found out that the hospital had had several other strange medical incidents, so he found a way to get a job there. He wanted to find the core members of the cult and save the trapped patients. Soon, Lin noticed that Chen was different. He intentionally left clues during surgeries to see how Chen would react. Sure enough, Chen took the bait and tried to stop Lin, which confirmed her true identity. Chen knew she had to find a way to get rid of Lin, or else he would destroy the cult sooner or later. She began planning to use the hospital's environment to create an accident and eliminate Lin during a night shift surgery. But Lin wasn't idle either. He knew he had to act quickly. He set a trap, planning to lure Chen into the basement and expose her true identity. At night, the hospital basement was cold and dark, with flickering lights casting shadows on the walls. Chen walked into the basement, clutching a cold scalpel in her hand, ready for the worst. Just as she stepped inside, Lin appeared from the shadows, also holding a scalpel. Neither of them said much. They both knew this was their final chance. Lin shouted, "Chen, do you even know what you're doing? You're murdering people." Chen smiled slightly, her smile filled with fanaticism.
These souls belong to us. This is their fate, and it is my mission.
In the basement, the lights flickered, and the cold gleam of the scalpel shone in the darkness. The air was full of tension and despair, as if a deadly conflict could erupt at any moment. Chen stepped forward, each move deliberate and cold. She knew exactly what was at stake, not just her own fate, but the future of the entire organization. Just as Chen was about to strike, the basement door suddenly burst open, and several police officers rushed in, quickly taking control of both of them. It turned out that Lin had secretly informed the police before the confrontation, preparing to expose Chen's true identity in the basement. Afterward, word of the incident spread throughout the hospital. The police arrested Chen and followed the clues to uncover the cult and the related crime ring. The mystery behind the patients who had disappeared without a trace was finally solved. The cult was dismantled, and Lin's sister finally received justice. As for Chen, the cult's saint who had hidden behind the mask of an ordinary nurse, she was ultimately brought to justice, ending her life of crime. The battle between good and evil ended with justice prevailing. However, the souls lost in the hospital could never return, leaving behind scars that could never be erased from this dark chapter of history.